Ethan lived alone in a small apartment at the edge of the alien trade district. It was a quiet night, the kind that usually passed without anything strange. Outside, the sky was dark with heavy clouds, and the rain fell in a steady rhythm, making the streets shine under the dim streetlights. Ethan was reading a book in bed when he heard a faint scratching sound near his door. At first, he thought it was just the wind or maybe a loose sign swinging in the rain, but then the sound came again, sharper. As if something was trying to get in, he set his book down and listened. There it was again. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch. Ethan frowned and got up, his bare feet touching the cold floor. He walked quietly to the door, placing his ear against it. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain. Then, suddenly, the door shook, and a small figure stumbled inside. It happened so fast that Ethan froze in place. The intruder slipped on the wet floor, almost falling, and then turned to face him. It was a girl, but not human. Her skin was pale with a faint shimmer, like the surface of a pearl under moonlight. Her large eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her hair clung to her face, dripping with rain. She was soaked from head to toe, wearing torn clothes that hung loosely. From her thin frame, her feet were bare, and she shivered violently. I am sorry," she said, in broken human language. Her voice trembling, I thought. Safe. Her words were strange, but the fear in her voice was clear. Ethan blinked, still processing what had just happened, before he could ask anything. She looked over her shoulder at the open door, panic flashing in her eyes. She pushed the door shut quickly and stepped back from it. Breathing hard, up close, Ethan noticed something else, a small glowing mark on the side of her neck. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was alive. He didn't know what it meant, but it gave him a bad feeling. "Who are you?" "What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She hesitated, looking at the floor. "Lyra," she finally said, "my name." Lyra, before Ethan could say another word. A new sound cut through the rain, heavy footsteps in the hallway outside. Lyra's eyes widened in fear, and she moved toward the corner of the room. "They come," she whispered, almost too softly. To hear, Ethan glanced at the door, his mind racing. Who was after her? Why did she come here? The footsteps grew louder, then came a deep, harsh voice from the other side of the door. "Open up, human," it demanded. Ethan could hear another voice, lower, saying something in an alien language he didn't understand. The sound of metal. Boots on the wet floor outside sent a chill down his spine. Lyra's breathing became quick and uneven. "They take me back," she whispered. "Please. Hide." Ethan looked at her, small and trembling, and then back at the door. His instincts told him to stay out of trouble, to let whoever was outside take her away. But something in her eyes stopped him. They were full of fear, but also hope, as if she was silently begging him to choose her side. The pounding on the door came again, harder this time, human. "We know she came in here. Open this door now." Ethan's mind raced. He had only seconds to decide. Hand her over and keep himself safe, or lie and protect her, risking everything. Lyra's gaze stayed locked on him, her lips trembling. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Get under the blanket," he whispered, pointing to the couch. She hesitated for a split second before crawling under it, pulling the blanket over herself until she disappeared from sight. The pounding continued. Ethan took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it just enough to see two large alien figures standing there. Their skin was rough and dark, their eyes small and sharp. They wore black armor with a strange crest. On the chest, one of them stepped forward, the metal on his boots clinking against the floor. "We are looking for a runaway," he said in a deep, cold voice. Small female, pale skin. Glowing mark on her neck. Ethan kept his face blank. "No one came here," he said, his voice steady. The alien narrowed his eyes, studying Ethan's. face for a moment. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "If you see her, you will call us," he said, turning away. The other alien gave Ethan one last look before following. Their heavy steps fading down the hall, Ethan shut the door quietly and locked. The room was silent, except for the sound of the rain. Lyra slowly pulled the blanket off her head, her wide eyes still full of fear. "They will come back," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer, but he knew she was right. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, a human and an alien girl stood staring at each other, both knowing that whatever just started tonight would not end easily. Ethan stood still for a moment after the aliens left, listening to the sound of their footsteps fade down the hall. Only when he was sure they were gone did he turn back to Lyra. She was still crouched under the blanket, her hands gripping the fabric tightly. "You can come out now," he said quietly, slowly. She pushed the blanket aside and rose to her feet, her thin frame trembling, her wet hair stuck to her face, and water dripped onto the floor, making small puddles. "They will come back," she said again, her voice low. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I figured," he replied. "You want to tell me why they're after you?" She hesitated, looking down at the floor. "It is not safe to say," she murmured. "If you know." "You in danger?" Ethan gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I think I'm already in danger," he said. "You broke into my room, you brought trouble to my door, and now I'm lying to alien enforcers." Lyra's eyes lifted to his, shimmering faintly in the dim light. "I did not mean," she said. "I was running. They follow me, my steps. Bring me here." Ethan noticed her broken sentences, the way she seemed to struggle with certain words. "Your human language is not bad," he said, "but where did you learn it?" Lyra's lips pressed together for a moment. "From traders. From overhearing, from watching," she said slowly. "I never speak to human before." He raised an eyebrow. "Never? Then why come here?" Her gaze flickered to the door and back. "I felt safe," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Ethan sighed again and glanced at the couch. "All right, you can stay here for now. But you need to tell me your name." She tilted her head slightly, as if confused. "I tell you already," she said softly. "Lyra." The name lingered in the air for a moment. Ethan walked into the small kitchen area and opened a cupboard, pulling out a packet of dried noodles. "You hungry?" he asked. Her eyes followed the packet like a starving animal watching food. "Yes," she whispered. Almost too quietly, Ethan quickly boiled water and made the noodles. Placing the steaming bowl in front of her, Lyra hesitated for a second before picking up the fork and eating. Her movements were quick but careful, like she was afraid the food might be taken away. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her. She ate as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days. After a while, she set the empty bowl down and let out a small breath. "Thank you," she said. Ethan nodded, but before he could speak, she reached for the edge of her torn sleeve, pulling it back slightly. His eyes widened when he saw it. A strange mark burned into her skin. It was a circle with sharp lines running through it, faintly glowing. "What is that?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Lyra's expression darkened. "An ownership mark," she said quietly. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "You mean someone owns you?" She nodded once, her eyes lowering again. "Not anymore. I run away." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had heard of alien slavery before everyone had, but seeing the mark on her skin made it real in a way that rumors never could. "And those two outside? They're here to take you back," he said slowly. Lyra nodded again. "They are hunters. They find and bring back," she whispered. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to think. If the hunters knew she came here, they'd return. And next. time they might not knock. You can't stay here, he said. Lyra's shoulders sank. I know. I go now, she said, turning toward the door. Ethan frowned. You're just going to walk out there? They'll grab you in 5 seconds. She stopped, but didn't look at him. It is my problem. Not yours, she said softly. For a moment, Ethan considered letting her leave. It would be the safest thing for him. But the image of her eating like she hadn't seen food in days stayed in his mind, and that mark on her arm. It made his stomach twist. You're not going anywhere tonight, he said finally. Lyra turned to him slowly. Her eyes wide, but no buts. He cut in. You can stay here until we figure something out. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her face, not just fear, but relief. She nodded slightly. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan moved to the door, checking the lock twice before pulling a chair in front of it. Get some rest, he said. We'll talk in the morning. Lyra hesitated before sitting on the couch again. Wrapping the blanket around herself, her eyes stayed on the window. Watching the rain slide down the glass, Ethan went back to his room, but he didn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the rain and thinking about the strange girl now in his living room. He had no idea who she really was or why she had run to his door, but deep down, he knew one thing. This was not going to end quietly. Morning came slowly, with pale light creeping through the blinds. Ethan hadn't slept much, his mind turning over the same questions again and again. Who was Lyra really, and why did she end up at his door? He walked into the small living room and found her sitting quietly on the couch, knees pulled close, eyes watching the window like she expected trouble. Morning, Ethan said softly. She turned her head but didn't smile. You not sleep? She murmured, noticing the tiredness in his face. He gave a small shrug. Neither did you, he replied. She didn't answer, just looked back out the window. Ethan sat down in the chair across from her. We need to talk about that mark on your arm, he said. Her body tensed immediately, her fingers clutching the blanket tighter. No, she said sharply. Better you not know. He leaned forward. Too late, I already saw it. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other. Finally, she exhaled slowly. It is a brand, she said quietly. They put on people who are owned. Ethan already suspected that, but hearing her say it made it more real. Slavery, he muttered, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. Lyra gave a single nod. Was property, she said, her voice flat. Her hands moved to pull her sleeve down again, but Ethan stopped her gently. Let me see it properly, he said. She hesitated, then slowly rolled the sleeve up. The brand was larger than he had realized last night. A ring of alien script surrounding a jagged symbol, glowing faintly under her skin. The edges looked burned in, not tattooed. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. How long have you had this? Since I was taken, she said simply. Years. I don't know how many. Ethan frowned. Taken from where? My homeworld, she said. Small, green, warm place. Not like here. She spoke slowly, as if remembering it hurt. They came in ships. Took the young. Sold us. Far away, her words painted a picture Ethan didn't want to see. So the hunters last night. They were hired to bring you back to the last owner. Yes, she whispered. He paid much for me. He not want to lose. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held herself stiff, as if refusing to break. Ethan sat back, rubbing his face. You know, if they find you here, they'll probably drag me away too. Yes, she said, meeting his eyes. That is why I must go. Ethan shook his head and walked right into them. No, she tilted her head slightly, confusion in her expression. Why? She asked softly. Why? Help me. He didn't have a clear answer. Because you deserve better than this. he said finally, surprising himself with how much he meant it. A faint sound in the hallway made both of them freeze. Ethan stood and moved to the door, listening. It was just a neighbor passing by, but the tension in the room didn't fade. "They will come again," Lyra said. "They always find." Ethan looked at her sharply. "You sound sure." "I know how they hunt," she said quietly. "They track the brand. It sends signal." Ethan's eyes widened. "You mean they can follow you because of that thing on your arm?" She nodded. "That is why I never stay one place long. But last night, I could not run anymore." He stepped closer, examining. "The faint glow, can it be removed?" Her lips tightened, "Not by human hands." "Not easy, and if wrong, it will kill me." The weight of her words sank in. "So either we remove it the right way, or they'll find you no matter where you hide." "Yes," she whispered. For a moment, the only sound was the rain still falling outside. Ethan sat down again. "You didn't choose my door by accident, did you?" She looked away. "I felt something," she admitted, "like I must come here." "You feel safe?" Ethan's brows furrowed. "Felt like instinct." "Yes," she said, "my kind. We can sense danger, and sometimes safety." Her voice softened. "When I saw your face, I knew he didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to believe it was fate. The other part thought maybe she was just desperate and lucky." But before he could respond, a sharp, metallic clang echoed from somewhere below. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound. "They hear," she whispered, fear flashing in her eyes. Ethan moved quickly to the small back window, peering out. Two armored figures were moving through the alley, scanning doors. "They're checking every building," he said. Lyra stood, pulling the blanket from her shoulders. "I must go now," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Ethan grabbed her wrist. "No, if you walk out there, it's over." Her eyes filled with conflict. "I will not bring you trouble," she said. "You already did," he replied. "But I'm not letting them take you." She looked at him for a long moment, her glowing eyes holding a mix of fear and something else. "Trust." Finally, she gave a small nod. "What do we do?" she asked. Ethan's mind was already racing. "We move before they reach this floor." He said, "I know a way to the back alley without being seen." Lyra's fingers tightened around the blanket. "You will run with me." "Yes," he said without hesitation. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had made a choice he couldn't take back. The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew louder, heavy and purposeful. Ethan's heart pounded as he looked toward the door. "They're on this floor now," he whispered. Lyra's hands clutched the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her eyes flickered toward the small window in the kitchen. "Out there?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Too high. We'd break our necks." He moved quickly toward the back of the apartment, pulling open a narrow door that led to the utility hall. It was dim, smelling of dust and metal, and it connected to a fire escape that few people knew still worked. "This way," he said. Lyra followed without hesitation, her bare feet making almost no sound on the floor. Ethan closed the door behind them just as loud knocking rattled his apartment door. They moved down the narrow hall, the dim emergency lights flickering overhead through the thin walls. Ethan could hear muffled voices in the main hallway, the hunters demanding entry. "They will break door," Lyra whispered. "Then we'll be gone before they do," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The utility hall ended in a rusted metal ladder leading down to the first floor. Ethan climbed first, his hands gripping the cold rails. Lyra came after him. Moving quickly, despite her small frame, halfway down, a sudden metallic creak echoed. They froze from somewhere below. The sound of boots on metal steps rang out. "There?" "Coming from the bottom too," Ethan muttered, Lyra's eyes darted to a narrow side door halfway down the ladder. "This way," she said, pointing. Ethan didn't argue. They pushed through it and found themselves in an old maintenance tunnel that smelled faintly of oil and damp concrete. The tunnel was cramped, with thick pipes running along the walls, and low overhead lights buzzing faintly. They hurried through, the echo of their steps swallowed by the narrow space behind them. Faint shouts and clanging boots reminded them that the hunters were close. "How do you even know this place?" Ethan asked as they moved. "I remember places like this from other cities," she said. "Always tunnels. Always ways to hide." At the end of the tunnel was a heavy metal hatch. Ethan tried the handle, stuck. He cursed under his breath and threw his weight against it. The metal groaned but didn't open. Lyra stepped beside him, placing her small hand on the handle. Her eyes glowed faintly for a moment, and the hatch clicked open. Ethan stared for a split second, but didn't ask. "Later," he muttered, pulling it open. They emerged into a dark alley behind a row of abandoned warehouses. Rain poured down from the roof edges, making small rivers on the cracked pavement. "This way," Ethan said, leading her toward the main street. But as they turned the corner, two more hunters stepped into view. Their black armor gleamed under the rain, and the glow of their visor lenses locked onto them instantly. "Run," Ethan hissed, grabbing Lyra's hand. They sprinted back into the maze of alleys, the hunters shouting behind them. Lyra's bare feet splashed through puddles, and Ethan could feel her hand trembling in his grip. More footsteps echoed. "Ahead, they're cutting us off," she said, her voice urgent. Ethan's eyes scanned the alley and spotted a half-open door in one of the warehouses. Without thinking, he pulled her toward it. They slipped inside and found themselves in a vast, dark space filled with towering stacks of rusted cargo containers. The air smelled of metal and old oil, and the only light came from narrow gaps in the walls. Ethan pulled Lyra behind one of the containers just as the door creaked open again. The hunters' voices carried through the warehouse. "They're here." Spread out, one said in their harsh alien tongue. Ethan put a finger to his lips, and Lyra nodded silently. They crouched low, listening to the slow, deliberate steps moving closer. Every sound in the warehouse felt magnified. The drip of rainwater, the distant hum of machinery somewhere outside. Lyra's breathing was quick and shallow, and Ethan could feel his own pulse pounding in his ears. One set of footsteps came dangerously close, the shadow of a hunter stretching across the side of the cargo container. Ethan reached for the nearest object, a loose metal pipe lying on the floor, and hurled it across the room. It clanged loudly, echoing off the walls. The hunter turned toward the sound and moved away. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand again. "Now," he whispered. They slipped between the containers, weaving through the narrow paths until they found another exit at the far side. It led to a loading dock that opened to the old docks district. "This place safer?" Lyra asked. "Not really," Ethan said, "but I know somewhere nearby we can hide." They moved quickly through the docks, passing silent cranes and rows of derelict ships. Finally, they reached an old cargo container half buried under scrap metal. Ethan pulled the door open just enough for them to slip inside. The air was cold and smelled faintly of rust, but it was dry. They sat down on the metal floor, catching their breath for a long moment. Neither of them spoke outside. The rain drummed on the metal roof, and distant footsteps echoed faintly. "They won't stop," Lyra said finally, her voice soft but certain. "I know," Ethan replied. She looked at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the dim light seeping in through the cracks. "They will chase until they have me, or I am gone." Ethan met her gaze. "Then we just have to make sure they never get you," he said. Something in his voice made Lyra pause, as if she was hearing a promise she didn't expect. For the first time since she arrived at his door, her lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. The old cargo container was cold, but at least it was dry. Ethan sat against the wall, catching his breath, while Lyra rested across from him with her knees pulled close. Her eyes kept scanning the thin slits of light between the rusted panels. Listening for sounds outside, she was tense, like a wild animal expecting the next attack at any moment. "You didn't tell me you could open locked doors like that," Ethan said finally. Lyra didn't look at him. "I did not want you to." "No," she said quietly. Ethan tilted his head. "Why not?" "Because when people know, they want to use me," she whispered. Her voice almost lost under the sound of rain on the metal roof. He leaned forward slightly. "So what is it exactly? That glow in your eyes?" "The thing with the hatch." She hesitated, her fingers twisting. "In the fabric of her blanket, my kind." "We can touch the energy in things," she said slowly. "Machines, locks, sometimes even minds." Her voice dropped lower. "It is dangerous to us." "Dangerous to those around us." Ethan frowned. "Dangerous how?" Lyra's gaze shifted toward him, her eyes faintly glowing in the dim light. "If I use it too much?" "It hurts me," she said. "But if I use it on the wrong thing, it can destroy." The way she said destroy sent a small chill down Ethan's spine. He thought back to how the hatch had opened so easily under her hand. That was no trick. And if she could do that to a lock, what else could she do? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "The hunters. They know what I am," she said. "That is why they want me back." Ethan narrowed his eyes, "Not just because of the brand." "The brand means I am owned," she explained. "But what I am worth, it's more than any price." Ethan leaned back against the cold wall. "So you've been running from people who want to use you like a weapon?" "Yes," she said simply. "Every place I go, I am found." Her voice trembled slightly, but her face stayed calm for a moment. The only sound was the rain. Then Ethan asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "When you found my door last night, you said you felt safe." Lyra nodded. "Yes. What if that wasn't an accident?" He said quietly. Her eyes met his again. "I do not think it was," she admitted. "Something told me to go there." Like a voice without words, Ethan let out a slow breath. "Well, whatever it was, it's got me involved now," he said. "And if we're going to survive this, we need a plan." Before Lyra could respond, a sharp clanging echoed somewhere outside. Both of them stiffened. "They are still searching," she whispered. Ethan moved closer to the crack in the container door, peering out into the wet gray daylight. Through the rain, he saw shapes moving, not just hunters, but small, hovering drones sweeping the docks, scanning each container. "They're using search drones now," Ethan said. "We need to move before they find this one." Lyra stood, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I can hide us," she said slowly. Ethan turned to her. "How?" She stepped closer to the door and placed her hand against the cold metal. Her eyes began to glow brighter, the faint hum of energy filling the air. Ethan felt the hair on his arms rise as if a storm was passing overhead. The light inside the container seemed to shift slightly, almost like the shadows had deepened. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Hiding us from their machines," she said, her voice strained. "The drones will pass without seeing." A few seconds later, the sound of a drone passed directly overhead, its scanner beams sweeping the area. Ethan held his breath. The beam moved across the door, and then continued without pausing. The drone drifted away, its mechanical hum fading into the rain. Lyra staggered slightly, gripping the side of the container for support. Ethan moved quickly to steady her. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "It takes much. But we are safe for a little while." He helped her sit down again. "That's why you didn't want to tell me," he said softly. "Yes," she whispered, "because now you see what I can do." Ethan's mind was already moving ahead. "If you can hide us from their scanners, okay, maybe you can also mess with their tracking signal." Her expression tightened. Maybe? But if I try and fail, they will know exactly where we are. Before Ethan could respond, distant shouts echoed through the docks. They both froze, listening. The voices were moving fast. The hunters had found some sign of them. Ethan grabbed his bag. "We can't stay here," he said. "You're strong. But you're not a shield we can hide behind forever." Lyra stood, her blanket slipping slightly to reveal the glowing brand on her arm. She looked at him for a long moment. "You? Help me." "I will help you," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. "Deal?" They slipped out of the container into the rain. Moving along the shadowed edges of the docks, every step felt heavy with danger. But there was also a strange new feeling in Ethan's chest. He wasn't just running anymore. He was protecting something important, something the whole galaxy seemed to want. The rain had turned heavier, soaking Ethan's jacket as he and Lyra slipped between the towering stacks of abandoned cargo crates. The air was sharp with the smell of wet rust and the distant sound of waves crashing against the docks, mixed with the faint mechanical hum of the search drones. Ethan kept his head low, guiding Lyra through the narrow gaps. She followed silently, her eyes constantly scanning. "They are close," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. He didn't ask how she knew. Every time she had warned him before, she had been right. They reached the far end of the dockyard, where an old transport ship sat half buried in metal scaffolding. "This is our best shot," Ethan said. "If we can get inside, I can check. If it still runs," Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if it does not?" Ethan gave a small shrug. "Then we improvise." They moved toward the ship. But halfway across the open ground, a deep, metallic voice called out, "Human, stop." Ethan spun around to see 3 armored hunters stepping out from between the crates, their weapons raised. Rain streaked down their black helmets, making the glowing lenses over their eyes shimmer like cold fire. Lyra froze, her hand tightening on Ethan's sleeve. The lead hunter took a step forward, his boots splashing in the puddles. "You have something that belongs to us," he said coldly. "Hand her over, and we will let you live." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not happening," he said. The hunter tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "Then you will die with her," he replied, raising his weapon before Ethan could react. Lyra stepped forward. Her eyes began to glow brighter, casting a faint light in the rain. The hunters stopped. For a moment, as if recognizing what was about to happen. "She is activating." One of them barked in their own language. The air seemed to shift, the rain around Lyra catching the light from her eyes. Ethan felt a strange pressure in his chest, like the air itself had grown heavier. Lyra raised her hand slowly, and the puddles on the ground rippled outward as if pushed by an invisible force. One of the hunters lunged forward, but before he could reach her, a sudden wave of energy blasted from her body. It hit all 3 hunters at once, sending them crashing backward into the crates. The metal groaning under the impact, Ethan stood frozen for a moment, staring. He had seen her open locks and hide them from drones. But this was raw power. Lyra swayed slightly, her breathing sharp. "They will get up," she said, her voice trembling. "We must go." They ran toward the transport ship, the rain pounding harder now. Ethan found the side hatch and yanked on. "The handle stuck. Move," Lyra said, placing her palm against it. The lock clicked open instantly, and they slipped inside, closing the hatch behind them. The ship's interior smelled of old fuel and metal dust. Dim emergency lights glowed. Along the walls, Ethan moved quickly to the cockpit. Wiping water from his eyes, the controls were old but intact. "Maybe we can get this thing moving," he muttered, starting to press switches. The ship's systems groaned to life, the faint hum of power returning to the walls before they could celebrate. A heavy clang echoed from outside. "They're boarding," Lyra said sharply. Ethan's stomach dropped. How? That door, they have cutters, she said. They will burn through fast. Ethan turned toward her. Then we make this quick, he said. He dashed to the storage bay and grabbed a metal rod from the wall when the first sparks flew. From the hatch, he stood ready. The metal door glowed red, then fell inward with a crash. The first hunter stepped through. Weapon raised, Ethan swung hard, the rod connecting with the hunter's arm. Making the weapon clatter to the floor, the second hunter pushed in behind him, but before he could fire, Lyra unleashed another wave of force. Slamming him into the wall, her eyes burned with light now, the air around her pulsing with energy. The third hunter tried to flank them, but Ethan caught him with a low strike to the knee. Sending him stumbling, Lyra's power surged again. A shockwave throwing him out through the hatch into the rain. The sound of distant shouts told them more. We're coming. They will not stop, she said, her voice weak but determined. Ethan looked at her, breathing hard. Then let's give them a reason to. He sprinted back to the cockpit, Lyra following unsteadily with a final pull of the lever. The ship's engines roared. Shaking the metal frame, the landing clamps broke free and the ship began to lift from the dock outside. The hunters fired at the rising vessel, energy bolts sparking against the hull. Lyra stood near the open cockpit door, her glowing eyes fixed on the hunters below. She raised her hands one last time, sending a wave of energy that knocked the nearest group off their feet. Ethan pulled the controls back hard, and the ship shot upward into the stormy sky. The city lights blurred below as they climbed higher. Only when the clouds swallowed them did Ethan finally allow himself to breathe. He looked over at Lyra. You all right? She nodded faintly, though she was pale and exhausted. You saved us, he said quietly. She met his gaze. And you saved me. She replied. Ethan didn't know what was waiting for them beyond the storm. But one thing was certain. They were no longer just running. They were fighting for her freedom. The transport ship cut through the storm clouds. Engines groaning under the strain. Ethan kept his hands tight on the controls. Glancing at the flickering radar screen, they had broken free from the docks, but the blips on the screen told him. The hunters were still in pursuit. They're following us. He muttered. Lyra stood behind him, holding onto the doorway for balance. Her glowing eyes dimming as exhaustion set in. How long until they catch us? She asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. Not long if we stay on this course. She stepped closer, her voice low. Then we must choose. He glanced back at her. Choose what? Keep running, or stop running forever, she said. Her words carrying more weight than he expected. Ethan studied her face. What do you mean? She moved to the co-pilot's seat, lowering herself into it slowly. If we run, they will follow until they have us, no matter where we hide. She said, if we face them now, maybe we end it. He frowned. Face them. Lyra, there's a whole squad after you, maybe more. Her eyes lifted to meet his. And you fought 3 with only a metal rod, she said softly. You are not afraid. Ethan gave a small laugh under his breath. Oh, I'm afraid, he said, but I guess I'm too stubborn to care. Lyra leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. My kind. We are taught to hide our power, she murmured, because when we show it, the galaxy sees a weapon. She opened her eyes again, the faint glow returning. But if I use it fully, without holding back, maybe they will never come again. Ethan's grip tightened on the controls. That could kill you. Maybe? She said simply. But if I do nothing, we both die eventually. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the space. Then Ethan turned the ship hard to the left. What are you doing? She asked, giving us a chance. He said, if we're going to do this, we'll do it on our terms. He guided the ship toward a stretch of open sea below, away from the city lights. The radar showed the hunters gaining quickly. There, "Ships closing in. Here they come," Ethan said, flipping switches to divert more power to the shields. Lyra's hands tightened on the armrests. "When I start." "You must not touch me," she warned. "The energy will burn you." "Good to know," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. The first hunter ship broke through the clouds behind them, firing a burst of energy bolts. The transport shuddered as the shots hit the rear shields. Ethan pushed the engines harder. Pulling the ship into a tight turn, 2 more hunter ships appeared. Surrounding them in a loose triangle. "They're trying to box us in," he said. Lyra's eyes began to glow brighter, the light spilling across her pale skin. "Keep them close," she said, her voice calm now. Ethan glanced at her. "What are you going to do?" "End this," she replied. The hunters closed in, weapons ready. Ethan dodged their fire as best he could, drawing them into a tighter formation. Then Lyra stood. Stepping into the center of the cockpit, she raised her hands slowly, her eyes burning like twin suns. The air inside the ship seemed to vibrate, a deep hum building that made the glass tremble. Outside, the storm clouds began to swirl faster, lightning sparking across the sky. The hunters seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if sensing the danger. Then Lyra released her power. It burst from her like a wave of light, blinding and fierce. The energy shot through the rain, striking the nearest hunter ship. Metal screamed as the vessel was torn apart in midair, fragments scattering into the sea below. The other 2 ships fired in panic, but the bolts dissolved before reaching them. Lyra's second wave hit both at once, sending them spinning out of control before they exploded in flashes of fire and light. The cockpit fell silent, except for the rain and the soft crackle of the ship's systems. Ethan stared at her, still catching his breath. You destroyed them," he said. Lyra's glow began to fade, her body swaying. He rushed forward and caught her before she could collapse. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow. "You didn't have to," he began. "Yes," she whispered. Weakly, "I did. Now they will not come." For a while, he carried her to the co-pilot's seat, strapping her in gently. "Rest," he said. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You are a strange human," she murmured. "Most would have given me away." Ethan smirked slightly. "Guess I'm not most." They flew in silence for a long time, the storm easing as they left the city behind. Eventually, Lyra opened her eyes again. Still tired, but more at peace. "Where will we go?" she asked. Ethan looked out at the endless horizon. "Somewhere they can't find you. And if they do, we'll be ready." She nodded slowly. "Then I stay with you," she said simply. Ethan glanced at her. "You sure about that?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady now, "because now I choose where I belong." As the ship disappeared into the clear night sky, Ethan realized that everything in his life had changed. He wasn't just a man living in a small apartment. Anymore, he was the protector of someone the galaxy wanted, and he would fight anyone who tried to take her. Whatever came next, they would face it together.